There was a time when the sky forgot what the color blue meant. A time when the sun became a dull stain behind a veil of ash. A time when summer simply never came. The year 1816, the year humanity remembers as the year without summer. A year when snow fell in July, when crops froze in the fields, when people ate cats, rats, and even each other, but few knew the real reason. A year before, 10,000 kilometers from Europe, on a distant Indonesian island, a monster awoke, Mount Tambora, and its awakening became the deadliest volcanic eruption in human history. This is the story of how one mountain killed an entire planet, Indonesia, the island of Sumbawa. April 1815, here, among emerald jungles and rice paddies, rose Mount Tambora, 4,300 meters high, majestic, calm. The locals considered it sacred. They brought offerings, prayed at its base, built temples. They didn't know that inside this mountain, hell was boiling. April 5th, 1815. Evening, the first strike. The earth shook so violently that people fell where they stood. From the summit burst a column of smoke. Not ordinary grey smoke, black, thick as oil. It rose higher, higher than the clouds, higher than human eyes could see. The roar was so powerful that it was heard 2,500 kilometers away. In neighboring kingdoms, they thought war had begun. Soldiers grabbed their weapons. But this wasn't war. This was something far worse. The mountain was waking, and it was furious. For the next 5 days, Tambora smoked, spat ash, rumbled like cannon fire. Villages at the base evacuated. People fled into the jungle, carrying children, the elderly, whatever they could grab. But there was nowhere to run. The mountain was everywhere. Its shadow covered the island. And then came April 10th. 7 p.m. The mountain exploded. Not erupted, exploded. The sound was unlike anything ever heard on Earth. A roar that tore through the atmosphere like the scream of a dying god. The explosion was heard on Sumatra, 2,600 kilometers away. British officers thought it was naval artillery. They sent ships to investigate an imaginary battle. The force of the blast equaled 60,000 Hiroshima bombs. 60,000. The summit of Tambora simply vanished. 4,300 meters became 2,850. The mountain lost 1,400 meters of height in seconds. The top just disappeared into the sky. From above, it looked like the earth had opened its mouth and screamed. A column of fire, rock, and gas shot 43 kilometers into the stratosphere. Higher than airplanes fly. Higher than weather exists. The eruption column glowed orange and red against the black night. From 100 kilometers away, it looked like a second sun had been born. Angry, violent, dying. Pyroclastic flows, rivers of superheated gas and rock moving at 700 kilometers per hour, poured down all sides of the mountain. Everything in their path was obliterated. Not burned, not destroyed, obliterated. Trees, houses, temples, people, vaporized instantly. The temperature inside those flows reached 1,000 degrees Celsius. Entire villages ceased to exist in seconds. Not even ruins remained. Just nothing. The island of Sumbawa had a population of 12,000 people near the volcano. By morning, they were all gone. Not fled, not evacuated, gone, as if they had never existed. But Tambora wasn't finished. Tsunamis, born from the collapsing mountain, radiated outward. Waves 4 meters high smashed into neighboring islands. Coastal villages were swept into the sea. Ships in harbors were lifted and thrown inland like toys. And still, the mountain roared. For 3 days, Tambora erupted continuously. Pumice stones the size of fists rained from the sky hundreds of kilometers away. Ships at sea found themselves sailing through fields of floating rock. The ash was so thick that for 3 days, total darkness covered an area of 600 kilometers. Total darkness. At noon, People couldn't see their own hands in front of their faces. The sun had simply stopped existing. When the eruption finally subsided on April 15th, the island of Sumbawa was buried under a meter of ash. The ash layer was so deep that it took decades for vegetation to return. 71,000 people died in Indonesia, directly, instantly. But that was just the beginning, because what Tambora threw into the sky that night didn't just fall back down. It kept rising, higher and higher, into the stratosphere, where winds move around the planet, where ash doesn't fall, where it stays. 160 cubic kilometers of rock, ash, and sulfur dioxide were ejected into the atmosphere. The largest volcanic cloud in recorded history began its journey around the Earth, and the planet began to die. The ash cloud moved like a living thing, silent, invisible from the ground. But seen from above, it would have looked like a grey shroud slowly wrapping around the Earth. By June 1815, the cloud had circled half the planet. By August, it covered the entire globe. The sulfur dioxide turned into sulfuric acid droplets, billions of tons of microscopic particles floating in the stratosphere, reflecting sunlight back into space. The planet's temperature began to drop. Scientists today estimate the global temperature fell by 0.4 to 0.7 degrees Celsius. That doesn't sound like much. It was catastrophic. Winter of 1815–1816 was harsh, but not unusual. People survived. They had no idea what was coming. Spring 1816 arrived, but it didn't feel like spring. In New England, farmers planted their crops in April as always. The soil was cold, but that was normal. Then came May, and with it, frost. In May. Farmers woke to find their fields white with ice. Young shoots barely emerged from the ground, frozen solid. They replanted. What else could they do? June arrived. Surely June would be warm. June 6, 1816. Snow fell in Albany, New York. Not a light dusting, real snow. 15 centimeters of snow in June. In Quebec, 30 centimeters of snow fell. Rivers that had thawed froze solid again. People stood in their fields, watching snow bury their crops, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. One farmer in Massachusetts wrote in his diary, "This is Judgment Day. God has forsaken us." Across the Atlantic, Europe was freezing. In Switzerland, temperatures in June dropped below zero. Lakes that never froze. Rivers turned to ice. The crops died. All of them. In France, the wheat harvest failed completely. Bread prices tripled, then quadrupled. People rioted in the streets. They stormed bakeries, granaries, government buildings. Troops opened fire on crowds. In Ireland, the potato crop failed. Again, famine spread like plague. Families ate grass, bark, anything they could chew. In Germany, people slaughtered their horses for meat. When the horses were gone, they ate cats. When the cats were gone, they ate rats. Then, they ate each other. Reports of cannibalism emerged from rural areas. Desperate, starving people doing the unthinkable to survive. July brought no relief. In Connecticut, on July 9th, ice formed half an inch thick. Ice, in July. The corn froze in the fields, still green, never to ripen. August, normally the hottest month, brought killing frosts across the northern hemisphere. In New England, only one farm in 10 harvested anything that year. And what they harvested was barely enough to feed themselves. Snow fell in August in Vermont. In August, the sky remained a sickly yellow-grey. The sun, when visible at all, was a pale, weak disk, like looking at it through smoked glass. Sunsets, normally brilliant, turned blood red and brown. The ash in the atmosphere scattered light in ways never seen before. Artists painted these sunsets. JMW, Turner's famous orange skies. Those were Tambora sunsets, but beauty couldn't feed anyone. By autumn 1816, the Northern Hemisphere was in full crisis. Food supplies ran out. Grain stores, already depleted from the Napoleonic Wars, were empty. Oat prices in Europe increased by 700%. 700%. In Switzerland, the government declared a national emergency. The Swiss, normally prosperous, were reduced to eating moss and straw. In Hungary, people made bread from ground-up acorns and sawdust. In China, the monsoons failed. The summer rains that farmers depended on never came. The rice paddies dried up. In India, the monsoon disruption triggered floods instead. Entire regions were submerged. The rice crop drowned. Cholera, festering in the flood waters, exploded across India. It would eventually spread worldwide, becoming the first cholera pandemic, killing millions over the next decades. In the Middle East, snow fell in places that hadn't seen snow in centuries. But the true scale of death was impossible to measure. How do you count the dead in remote Chinese villages, in Indian slums, in African regions where famine simply became worse? Conservative estimates: 100,000 dead in Europe alone. Worldwide, possibly millions. And still, almost no one understood why. They didn't know about Tambora. News traveled slowly. The eruption had happened on a remote island. By the time word reached Europe, it was old news, a curiosity from a distant land. No one connected the dots. No one understood that the ash over their heads had traveled from Indonesia. They thought God was punishing them. They thought it was the end of the world. Churches filled with terrified believers praying for deliverance. Scientists were baffled. Meteorologists, primitive as they were, had no explanation. Some blamed sunspots. Others said it was Earth moving farther from the sun. All of them were wrong. The answer was in the sky, invisible, floating 40 kilometers above their heads, Tambora's ash cloud. Winter 1816 to 1817 approached with dread. If summer had been this cold, what would winter bring? People hoarded what little food remained. Grain stores were guarded by soldiers. Anyone caught stealing bread faced execution. In the cities, the poor died in the streets. Bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. In the countryside, entire villages were abandoned as families fled, searching for food, for warmth, for anywhere better. Migration began on a scale not seen in centuries. In Europe, tens of thousands packed what little they had and headed south, to Italy, to Spain, anywhere warmer. In America, farmers in New England abandoned their land. Families loaded wagons and headed west, toward what would become Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. This migration would reshape America. The population shift westward accelerated dramatically. Cities that would become Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, grew because of refugees from the year without summer. Some headed even farther. The first major wagon trains to Oregon and California included families fleeing the frozen east. But not everyone could leave. In a villa on Lake Geneva, Switzerland, a group of wealthy English writers found themselves trapped by the cold, rainy summer. They couldn't go outside. Day after day of grey skies and rain. To pass the time, they told each other ghost stories. One of them, a young woman named Mary Shelley, began writing a story about a scientist who creates life from dead flesh. She called it Frankenstein. The monster in her story, abandoned by its creator and wandering a cold, hostile world, was born from the cold, hostile summer of 1816. Lord Byron, also at that villa, wrote a poem called Darkness. I had a dream, which was not all a dream. The bright sun was extinguished, and the stars did wander darkling in the eternal space. He was describing what he saw out the window. Across Europe, artists captured the apocalyptic skies, the strange colors, the sense of doom. But while the rich wrote poetry, the poor starved. The winter of 1816 to 1817 was severe, but survivable. Barely. By spring 1817, the ash cloud was finally thinning. The sulfur droplets were settling, falling out of the stratosphere. Sunlight, real sunlight, began to penetrate again. Temperatures slowly rose. The summer of 1817 was still cool, but crops grew. Not bountifully, but they grew. The summer of 1818 was normal. The crisis had passed, but the scars remained. Europe's population had been devastated. Entire regions were depopulated. In Asia, the cholera pandemic triggered by the monsoon disruption would rage for decades. In America, the migration west had permanently shifted the nation's center of gravity, and technology changed too. In Germany, a forester named Karl Dreiss noticed something. With crops failing, oats were too expensive to feed horses. Horses were being slaughtered for meat. People needed a way to travel without horses. In 1817, he invented the Laufmaschine, the running machine, a wooden frame with two wheels. You sat on it and pushed with your feet. The first bicycle. The bicycle, one of humanity's most important inventions, was born because a volcano killed the summer. Today, Mount Tambora still stands on Sumbawa, silent, peaceful. Tourists hike to its caldera, the massive crater where the summit used to be. 6 kilometers wide, 600 meters deep. A lake sits in the caldera now, blue and serene. It's hard to imagine that this quiet mountain once killed a planet. Scientists study Tambora intensely, because it could happen again. Volcanoes like Tambora, called supervolcanoes, erupt rarely, every few hundred years, every few thousand. But when they do, they change the world. Yellowstone in America is a supervolcano. Toba in Indonesia erupted 74,000 years ago and nearly drove humanity to extinction. Tambora in 1815 showed us what even a moderate supervolcano can do. 160 cubic kilometers of material, 71,000 dead immediately. Millions more from the famine and cold, and a reminder. Nature doesn't care about our cities, our technology, our power. One mountain can humble an entire civilization. The year without summer taught humanity something we keep forgetting. We are fragile. Our food systems are fragile. Our climate is fragile. And somewhere, right now, another mountain is waiting. Tambora killed summer for 1 year. The next one could kill it for 10. The ash cloud is invisible until it's too late. The cold arrives without warning. And by then, there's nowhere to run. Because when the sky turns grey and stays grey, when snow falls in summer, when the sun becomes a memory, there is no escape. There is only survival or death. The year 1816, the year without summer, the year one volcano reminded humanity. We do not control this planet. We merely survive on it. And sometimes, we don't even do that. If you believe stories like this should never be forgotten, subscribe to the channel. It's a small gesture, but it means everything. It helps us continue telling these stories, remembering them, giving voice to those who no longer have one.